Hello and welcome to the Lebanese Politics Podcast. My name is Benjamin Red, joined as always by Nizar Hassan. Nizar, how's it going?
Great. Slept 3 hours, ready to do this.
Let's do it. Well, we've got lots and lots of news this week, right? Of course, cabinet was formed, and of course, we're going to have lots to say about that. We'll break everything down a little bit later. But first off, there was a really fun story that I think we have to talk about, right?
Yeah.
Bassil at Davos.
That was the story this week. I mean, this got all the attention. And the story is that, there's this Davos conference, basically the World Economic Forum, which is basically a bunch of rich people coming together and deciding what happens to the world, or talking about what happens to the world and what they're going to do to make it better. Obviously, they mean fuck us all up, but still, like, all the statesmen go there to sell their souls. I mean, to invite and encourage investments in their countries. And Bassil was one of them. He was invited there, and then everyone in Lebanon was like, he doesn't represent us, and there were petitions against him, and all of this campaign happened just spontaneously out of, people's anger against him. And we've talked about this a lot of times. He's like the most hated politician in the country, like by far.
Yeah, maybe, we've talked about this, like after the October 17th revolution broke out, he started to lay low, a very low public profile. Popping up at Davos may not be the best look for him, though, because he was on a panel there. And really, he just got roasted.
I mean, yeah, he wasn't really on a panel. He was like on that barbecue thing, like where you get grilled. Like, it's just literally the host, Hadley Campbell, roasting him all the time, asking him all of these questions with quite a performance. To be very fair, like it was by far not the most professional performance I've seen. She has these weird face expressions that she makes, like she asks him a question and then she raises her eyebrows and she looks at him like he's an evil monster who's just about to get caught.
Like she definitely knew that she was interviewing somebody who is not beloved by anyone, basically. Yeah.
And she expressed that before the interview. So what happened is basically people started like campaigning against him going there and the petitions and stuff. And then she said that, I understand, I hear your voice, but I'm going to be harsh on him. She said that on CNBC where she works. And then after that, the FPM vice president of the party, accused her of being part of a Zionist conspiracy, of Hadley Campbell, the TV host, of being part of a Zionist conspiracy against Bassil's reputation. Because, the Zionist project is very concerned with Bassil's reputation.
Yeah, right.
And because the evidence for her was that the TV host had a photo with the former Israeli president, Shimon Peres. So that's it, all you need to know. All the evidence you need in a case, and there's this Zionist conspiracy against him. Anyway, it was all just a bunch of fun things that happened this week, nothing really important. He got grilled with some basic questions like, why didn't you fix electricity? How do you have a private jet if you get $5,000 per month as a salary?
Which, by the way, on that line, the host asked Bassil, how did you get here? And Bassil was adamant it was not on taxpayer money. And he basically sort of admitted that it was like, friends paid for it. And fucking Sigrid Kaag. Oh my God, she came out of nowhere with just this devastating line saying like, we're not allowed to have friends like that in government. Because she is now a minister in the Dutch government. If you know that name, though, Sigrid Kaag, it's because she was here in Lebanon from like 2015 to 2017 as the UN Special Coordinator for Lebanon. And so she knows Gibran Bassil very well. She knows all of the players very, very well from her time here. And that was just a devastating comment coming from her also on the panel. Aimed at Bassil.
Yeah, it was strange that actually I was very surprised to see her take this stance, like Kaag was throwing shade at Bassil like very clearly, and it was surprising to me because I know her as a diplomat, more or less, someone who doesn't say things.
Right.
But one of the interesting things that I just want to point out in this interview is actually something serious, which is what Bassil said during the interview are the reasons why he couldn't basically achieve anything or his party couldn't achieve anything, although it has the largest parliamentary bloc. And these are many things. One of them is the fact that, in a confessional system, you can only get a quarter maximum of the parliament or whatever, which means that you will never get a majority to form a government alone to achieve your things. So he's basically saying two things. He's saying that his party cannot attract more than a quarter because it's basically only attracting part of the Christians, and it's not a cross-sectarian party. He's saying that his allies from other sectarian groups are not part of his project, so he's basically blaming his allies on the fact that he couldn't get anything done in his time in government. And he's saying, and he said it very explicitly, that the confessional system should go away and that that we should move towards secularism. He also said the economic and monetary policy of Lebanon over the last 30 years have been bad and should be changed. And then you look at all of these things he's saying, like constitutional democracy, confessionalism and sectarianism, and then economic policy, and you see that FPM didn't only tolerate these things. They had the most active role in re-establishing all of these pillars of the Lebanese system over the last 10 years, especially in rhetoric and in the performance, of course, in their ministries, but also in rhetoric. The rhetoric of partnership between or bringing back Christians' rights in the state and taking as much as possible from the resources of the states for the Christians, and the idea of letting go completely of the project of secularism and going into a very Christian-focused rhetoric, and their commitment to their allies and being in all of these governments that didn't achieve anything under the pretext of national unity, etc. It's basically he's talking about the problem and he represents it.
Yeah, absolutely. That is a very interesting, fun little story. But I think the big story that we really have to talk about is what happens after Bassil, right? What happens after he's no longer the foreign minister, but we have a new foreign minister and we have a new slate of ministers. After 33 days since Hassan Diab was designated as prime minister, after 84 days with no government, Lebanon finally has a new cabinet. And this new cabinet it looks a little bit different from what we were talking about last week. They added 2 ministers, right? And so instead of an 18-member cabinet, we are for the first time in independence Lebanon getting a 20-member cabinet. And there's some good things about this as well. I mean, first off, 20 is probably better than 30, bring down the size a little bit at baby steps.
Fewer state ministries for sure.
Yeah. They basically don't really have them, right? With the exception of OMSAR. And we have 6 ministers who are women, which is another first and a really big deal here in Lebanon. I mean, just the last cabinet that had 4 ministers was sort of breaking records. I think the previous record was 2 female ministers in a cabinet, and then last cabinet we had 4, and now we have 6. So now basically almost a third of the ministers are women, which is, maybe not great as a final state of things, but it is a step in the right direction, right? So we're moving in the right direction. Hopefully after this government falls at some point or resigns or whatever happens, the next government maybe will have more equal representation.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I just think that they did this to make it look nice, but yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, if that works in your favor, then
sure,
why not take it, right? There are no MPs in this cabinet. There are only 2 former ministers, Hassan Diab himself and Demianos Qatar, and the rest of them are fresh faces. I am still getting familiarized with all of their names and faces. If you show me a face of somebody, I probably don't recognize it yet. I need to do some flashcards or something. But yeah, basically 18 new names, roughly.
Yeah, and another good thing about it is that, according to Diab, nobody is running for parliament in the next election, which means that nobody is here to make some, a good legacy and then just invest it in, or basically what the idea is that you don't get to a ministry and then start distributing resources just to become an MP afterwards. This is what happens allegedly with a lot of people who, suddenly become very successful MPs. They get to a ministry, they focus on their own area, on their own constituents. They distribute some resources there, and then they get more luck as, clientelist lords or whatever. So Diab said that nobody from the current government will be running in the next parliament, which is in the next parliamentary elections, which is a good sign in that sense.
Yeah, so, and only a couple years off at this point, so you have to think about that.
Definitely. So basically, it's a government of people without a lot of political ambition, a government mostly of people who work in advisory roles more than actually, politicians of any kind.
Right. Now to get down to, to shave the size of the cabinet down from, usually about 30 people to 20, they had to put some portfolios together. And you know this because there are literally 21 ministries in the country, plus OMSAR, the Office of the Minister of State for Administrative Development. And so they had to combine a few of these things together so that you could have just 20 ministers, including a prime minister who doesn't have an actual portfolio. So what they did is they put OMSAR together with the Environment Ministry, which I don't understand how that works. The two ministries really don't have a whole lot in common. They don't really work a whole lot with each other, but
maybe
they are
the
both
two with
really
the lowest,
small.
Maybe they're the two with the lowest budgets, so they were like, okay, just put them together.
Essentially, yeah.
And give them to the independent.
Yeah. Demianos Qatar, who had been the finance minister and economy minister under the Makati government back in 2005, back when they combined ministries in a way that made sense, economy and finance together. He was very much demoted to this OMSAR role and environment role, right? They also put together social affairs and tourism. Again, I have no idea what the overlap there is. In past governments where they've gone small, this doesn't really make sense. Social affairs maybe could go with some other thing, like I believe social affairs has been paired, like with labor before in the past. So yeah, you have social affairs and tourism, which don't really make sense, but they're put together. And then you have probably the best pairing of all, the last one, which is culture and agriculture.
Great rhyme. I love this one. I absolutely love it. Yeah.
I have no idea what the two have in common other than in English, not in Arabic. In English, they both have culture in them.
Yeah, in Arabic, they don't have even a lot of letters in common. But sure, like the minister, when he was talking to LBC, was trying, or MTV or something, he was trying to make sense of the combination. And he's like, yeah, there's some of this and that, and then some of that and this. And I had no idea what he was saying. They're absolutely, why not, I don't know, culture and tourism, or environment and culture and tourism? I don't know. You can combine these things. Why the hell would you combine agriculture with culture, really, when like they're completely different fields? Like,
yeah,
you need different experience. You're dealing with a different kind of ministry with different functions, etc. So it doesn't make any sense.
Although I think the portfolio combining sort of, it starts to make a little bit more sense once you dive into it a little bit. Just like we were talking about with the small budgets for environment and OMSAR, if we start looking at the party shares, right? Okay, so the Free Patriotic Movement of Gibran Bassil, they have 6 portfolios, 6 ministers. They've got the Defense Ministry, Foreign Ministry, Energy Ministry, Justice Ministry, Economy Ministry, and the Ministry for the Displaced. Now, if you look at those 6, those are actually ministries that they had before, either as the FPM or as President Michel Aoun's share. And so far it looks a lot like the last cabinet. You have Tashnak, which is the Armenian ally of the FPM with 1 seat, youth and sports. That's something new, change in portfolios. The LDP of Talal Arslan with 2 seats, information, and the combined social affairs and tourism minister. And so all of those, that makes up 9 ministers right there. That's basically Gibran Bassil and his very close allies, right? And so he has basically 9 votes in cabinet. He definitely has more than a blocking third. He can rely on Tashnag alone, not even Talal Arslan, for a blocking third in this government. So he seems to be sitting in a pretty good position. The consultative gathering of Sunni politicians who are not allied with Mustaqbal, with Saad Hariri, they got 1 seat. Hassan Diab has himself, of course, and he was also able to name 3 other ministers. The Marada movement of Suleyman Frangia got 2 ministries, Public Works and Labor. Hezbollah got the Health Ministry and the Industry Ministry. And Amal retained the Finance Ministry and retained Agriculture and Culture, but they became just 1 minister, right? So if you look at these ministries, just like with the FPM, like you see a lot of commonalities. The FPM has a lot of the same ministries as before. Amal has the same ministries, basically. Hezbollah has their health ministry, and they got industry back, which is one of the ones that they, have had a few times in the past. Marada retained public works, and they got labor because the LF is no longer in the government. And of course, Hassan Diab is the prime minister, and then he also was able to name the interior minister, a Sunni position, right? One of the main Sunni positions. And so you see, like, there's a lot of the logic, a lot of the sectarian logic, a lot of the political logic from the last cabinet actually, goes into the DNA of this cabinet as well. And you can see how, like, maybe Hassan Diab basically just sat down when he was named and decided, okay, what can I do? How can I put this together without upsetting the apple cart completely and throwing all of the, all the chips in the air? Instead, let's just use what we know works for these parties and continue that with a few minor changes.
Yeah, exactly what the people were revolting against. It sounds like a great, post-uprising government to have exactly the same process that you had before, sectarian quotas and political quotas. And you remember last week we were discussing the government, and we were saying that we don't have a cabinet yet because of a disagreement over the Druze seat and the Catholic seat and the Marada being in or out and Talal Islam being in or out. In the end, they added 2 seats. They gave them each one, and therefore each of them has 2 seats now, and that's how it's resolved. Like, look at this government that's coming to us. Instead of being like, fighting over a program, over economic or social policy or whatever it might be that you actually need to discuss and make decisions about in this period of time in Lebanon's history, they're fighting over how many seats Talal Islam got. He got like 7,000 votes in the elections, in the parliamentary elections. He's not even a proper Zaim if not for Gibran Bassil supporting him. Or for Simon Frangi having what, like 5 MPs. Now, like, the whole fate of the country is dependent on these minor things, like the share of these small, relatively small politicians. It's absolutely humiliating, or like indignifying to the people of Lebanon for Diab to come and say, I am the government that came because of the revolution. And he said it in his speech, in this first speech, right, in Babda. He said, like, he was praising the revolution and that basically this government is a result of it. And then we see that, it's just exactly the same thing, but without the known faces. We have, instead of the known faces, we have, the advisors. And many of these people were advisors to politicians that were ministers in the last government or the one before, yeah.
So that's actually a good question, though. Like, how many of these people actually know what they're talking about? How many of them are actually qualified to be the minister of whatever they are minister of?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at all of their profiles, the maximum we can get to is 7. Like 7 people who have been trained or worked in the field that they will be working on as ministers. So it's not that in general you need to have like an expert as a minister. It's not the case in any country, right? But at least when you have 2 criteria, one of them is being politically independent and one of them is being technocrat. If you're saying, okay, we couldn't do the political independence thing because, parties need to nominate their ministers, but they are technocrats, at least be honest about that. They are not even technocrats. If 7 out of 20 are technocrats, there is a main problem. And there are ministries in which like things are quite sensitive today, and you just can't just have anyone there. You can't have an economy minister who does not work on economic policy, a labor minister who has no idea about labor conditions and statistics and things related to unemployment, etc. It's just basic things that you need in this time, and it's not in the government.
Right. Yeah. You mentioned the economy ministry right there. The new economy minister, Raul Name, he's sort of like economy adjacent, right? He is a banker essentially, and
that's what we need now. A banker to save the economy from the banks. Perfect.
Right.
And he's not the only one in the government who is from the banking kind of background or close to banks, etc. We have many people in government. Diab himself, the prime minister, is on the board of Lucid Investment Bank. You have Mohammed Fahmy, the interior minister. And remember, now we're witnessing, attacks and a lot of anger against the banks. Mohammed Fahmy, our new interior minister, is the security advisor of Blom Bank, has been the security advisor of Blom Bank for a long time. So that's basically his full-time job after retirement as a brigadier general from the army. So he's an army guy who's coming after a period of repression and a period of attacks against the banks. He's an army guy specialized in bank safety and security, and he's our new interior minister. Great, really, this is the revolution's government. I'm so happy, so excited. Thank you, Diab. Love you. Really, if you want to describe this government, the best way is basically the financial elite's government. It's It represents their interests, and this is really what was most frustrating to me about it, that they were so explicit with it, like bringing a banker, like the executive chairman of a bank, putting him in economy ministry, is basically saying it's not that we will not counter the interests of the banks, it's that they are represented directly in government, as the banking sector itself, more or less. So it's a really shame. It's a big shame, because any financial solution, any solution to the fiscal issues that the government will be enacting in the future will either be in the interest of the banks or the rest of the population and the economy. To be honest, it's no longer there's no longer any win-win situations possible.
Yeah, well, I mean, we sort of knew that this was the case. We knew that the Zoma weren't going to give up their power easily. They were going to give up their power, just because of an uprising that started up, and the way that the shares were handed out and assigned and everything. We knew that nothing. It seems as though the upper elite of Lebanon, has decided basically we don't want to change the system in any way. We want to sort of batten down the hatches and ride this out, and hopefully it'll turn out good. But don't expect big reforms. Don't expect really huge measures unless their back gets pressed really far up against the wall.
Mm-hmm.
So right now we're in a position where the ministers got named. They met for their first cabinet session, and they assigned a sort of a working group committee to draft the ministerial statement. That is the next thing up. According to the Constitution, they've got 30 days to come up with a ministerial statement that goes to the Parliament. Then the Parliament votes to give them confidence or deny them confidence. And this all has to happen, or they have to send the ministerial statement to Parliament within 30 days. Basically, by the 20th of February, we need to have this basically done. And sometimes it takes a little bit longer than 30 days. Like the canonical example for everything terribly going wrong in Lebanon is the government of Tamam Salem. And that took 33 days for Parliament to grant confidence. But that is the next step that we're looking into right now. But so far, things like there have been positive steps, and there have been some like sort of bizarre missteps already from the new ministers, right?
Yeah, I mean, what I noticed about this whole government is that it came like there's a political deal that was made, kind of, that it was done, and then the people were very flexible, moved across ministries. Some of the ministers themselves confirmed that they were being considered for other ministries as well, before being given the ministry that they were given, depending on the political share or the sectarian quota, etc. And so a lot of people might be not in the right place for them or whatever, but also like they don't have an agenda really that is bringing them together as a team, which Diab and Bassil and many people have said this was the main criterion for this government. And many of them have been like fucking up pretty bad. I mean, like the best example is the labor minister, Lama Douaihi. She had an interview, right, with LBC, and she was being asked about what she will do as a minister, and she's like, clearly we have very high unemployment rate, I'm quoting here, of course we can't promise that it will become, and she stopped, and then she said, as much as possible, we will try to work with other ministries to find a way to decrease unemployment. Also, there is work being done in the ministry on organizing foreign labor, so we will continue this as well. So basically, absolutely nothing. She didn't say anything. And then the host asked her, do you have a vision, or will you just pick up from where your predecessor, Abu Sulaiman, left? She's like, I met with Abu Sulaiman, he did good work in the ministry, so we will definitely pick up. We will also collaborate with NGOs to improve laws, to improve the situation of women, following up on the sacking of workers from companies. And here she touched, obviously she didn't reply to the original question, which is, do you have a vision? She touched on this thing, which is sacking of workers, and this is a great an insane phenomenon that's happening now. A lot of workers are being sacked from so many companies, or being told to work on small shifts, or etc., like get paid by commission instead of salary, etc. It's just a big deal. And so I asked her, how will you deal with this situation or the issue of sacked workers? And the response was, in the end, I have a company, and one should look at the company owner and the workers. That's it, really, what she said. And the workers have been very understanding of the employers recently.
Like it's really the employers that are hurting here, not the workers.
Yeah. And the workers are just, being empathetic towards the employers. Yeah? They're being sacked, but it's fine because, solidarity between you and the person exploiting you and then sacking you from work. this is a conflict of interest, right? You ask a labor minister, what are you going to do about people being sacked? And she's like, I have a company. What she's saying is like, I'm sacking people too, we're all doing it. What can we do? The workers have to understand. Horrible, really horrible beginning, and I'm very angry at this person that I just recently discovered.
And the labor ministry, like in general, like you mentioned Camille Abu Suleiman, her predecessor, he stepped in it really big with restrictions on Palestinian workers. So that's something that she's going to have to deal with, the continuing aftermath of that. And then also just in general, in case you don't know this, the labor ministry is just sort of like known as one of these ministries where the labor minister can make a lot of money on the side through corruption and like making people pay extra for their work visas and stuff like that. So this is just one of those things that I'm not making any specific allegations against any specific ministers, but it's one of those, it is known things that several ministers in the past have allegedly been enriched through illicit means. And it's something that any labor minister automatically comes under not enough scrutiny, but at least some public scrutiny. So this is another thing that she's going to have to deal with. She's not off to a good start. I'm sure she's probably smarter than what we've seen, though. But she's going to have a lot to deal with. This is a really important portfolio and one that comes under a lot of scrutiny.
Yeah, and I hope she learns about really about this field more, because she cannot go on like this. Like, she needs to meet with her advisors as soon as possible and get much better positioning on things. We also had a little fuck up by the foreign minister, whose Twitter account apparently, or one of his social media accounts, I think it was Twitter, announced the death of the Syrian foreign minister, Walid al-Muallim.
who's still alive.
Who's still alive. And then the minister came out and said, no, my account was hacked, etc. It's just like one of the things that happen. By the way, if anyone is tricked by this, the information minister, Manal Abd Samad, is not tweeting crazy shit. It's a parody account that is not explicitly saying it's a parody account, but there's one that's called Manal Abd Samad on Twitter that's basically tweeting at like TV channels, making fun of their shows and like making fun of the former information minister, etc. So that's not her. Don't panic.
But probably the minister that has received the most press thus far, other than the prime minister himself, is the new finance minister, Ghazi Bazni. Now, the situation in the country, obviously, it's still not doing too well economically. The lira was fixed at 2,000 this week, and that was a decision made, I think, Tuesday night by the syndicate of money exchangers. But they're reportedly, this isn't really happening. They're reportedly not selling dollars, right? So if you want to take your dollars and give them to the exchange for 2,000 lira, you can do that. But other way around, not so much, which is something that, absent some sort of facility from the central bank or something like that, it doesn't seem like this is a sustainable move. And I'm sure that very soon, if they haven't already started, the exchange dealers will start doing their sort of like side deals and going outside of the bounds of this, new peg of 2,000 to the dollar.
Yeah, and the important thing about it as well is that, first of all, that, it's just a trick. Like, you can't go and buy for 2,000, I just couldn't find it anywhere except in a few places on the first day that they announced, or the second day, and that was it. From then on, no one is selling dollars in large quantities, or they're selling it at 2,200 or 2,150, etc. So anyway, what happened so far is that the lira has almost officially now lost 30% of its value, right? From 1,500 to 2,000. And I'm saying that because the exchange shops, before making the statement, they had met with the central bank governor, and they mentioned that in the statement. So they made it look official. It doesn't matter. It's still not a change on the official, exchange rate. However, it looks like they're paving the way for something like that. Also, interestingly, this week, Ghazi Wazni made a very bold statement when he was being asked by a TV reporter about the lira. He said that the lira is never, it's impossible that the lira comes back to its original rate, its fixed rate, the one that the central bank still says is the official rate.
Which is very telling.
Yeah, he said the parallel market will go on for sure and will be changing, and the lira will be fluctuating. It can be organized by bringing in new money and remittances. As usual, the only two solutions we have are remittances and, more loans. And this is what Ghazi Wazni has been talking about in the last few days since he's been finance minister. Anyway, so he said, no, that's not possible. This will never happen. But the word never can be interpreted as not at all in Arabic dialect, in Lebanese Arabic dialect. So it might, that's why he gave himself the excuse the next day. And he said, no, I was saying like in the short term, it's not going to happen, but we don't know in the long term. In the long term, it might go back to 1,500. He's lying to you. It's not going to happen unless we have like an incredible economic transformation.
Or policies that support that, right?
Yeah.
You would have to have like real policies, not just hope for remittances and a World Bank loan or something like that. Or, Saudi Arabia to just like decide that, oh yeah, we really do want to support Lebanon now, even though we don't like their government. It makes no sense. The government actually, if they're going to have 15, make it back to the real peg, then they need very, very bold, real policies to be put in place in order to make that happen. And that doesn't seem like that's on the cards based on what the new finance minister is saying.
Yeah, and I think more important than what he's saying is what he's because when he was asked questions about what measures should be taken, he's like, we should send positive message to the inside and the outside, the internal market and internal stakeholders and foreign stakeholders. And, restore confidence or whatever. He didn't say anything about the measures, because what we are concerned about now is that how Lebanon will deal with its payments, the upcoming payments, we'll talk about in a second, or whether it will do a rescheduling or a restructuring of public debt, which every economist now agrees has to be done. Instead, what the first thing that he's done so far is basically he's met with the IMF and the World Bank, right? These were the first meetings that he's had. The two institutions that represent the global paradigm of neoliberal economic policies. He's met with both of them, and we're in a situation where Lebanon is seriously talking, and many Lebanese officials are seriously talking about an IMF deal. IMF giving us, for those who don't know, IMF is the International Monetary Fund. And so the IMF might give us some money in return, not in return, but on the condition of doing some reforms. And when the IMF talks about reforms, this is like extreme austerity measures, not really reforms, just like reducing your fiscal spending as much as possible, more than like transforming your economy into a productive direction. They don't really care about these things as much as like fiscal consolidation. So anyway, he's now sitting with these two institutions. These are the two institutions he sat with first, and then he's seeking loans, soft loans, from abroad to help Lebanon import medicine, oil and gas, and wheat. And then on the issue of Lebanon like paying its public debt service, its unbearable public debt service, he said that it will be discussed next week in the cabinet what we will do, because we have Eurobond payments soon in March, etc. But it's overall his paradigm is basically the same one, because he was the financial advisor of Birri and of Ali Hassan Khalil. And instead of Ali Hassan Khalil, now we have him as finance minister. We should not expect anything different, except if Diab comes in with a deal from like international actors that Birri cannot refuse. Otherwise, we will see more of the same, it seems.
Yeah, and this is an issue that is just barreling down on us. It's good that they're going to actually discuss it as early as this coming week. Like, I remember thinking about this, March is so far away, back last year. And now we're at the end of January, going into February, and this is like literally we've got $1.2 billion in principal due on March 9th. So it's not even the end of March, it's the beginning of March. And then from then on out, March, April, May, June, we have just massive dollar payments to make every one of those months. So it totals up to something like more than $3.3 billion that the state has to pay in dollars between March and June of this year.
And that's very tricky, right? Because if you don't pay if you say I don't want to pay them, you're basically defaulting on your debt internationally, which is scarier than internal debt maybe. And if Lebanon does pay this money, it means that it's not using it for the other main thing that it needs it for, which is covering the foreign exchange reserve, enhancing the foreign exchange reserve so that it covers the or it prevents the huge depreciation of the lira for the dollar. So basically, central bank or the Lebanese state is making a decision now, and that's a very tricky one, of whether saving Lebanon's debt reputation, more or less, or its record of always paying back the debt that it owes despite the incredible interest, or saving the lira. Like this is kind of the choice now. So if there's no debt restructuring program before March, if there's no announcement by the Lebanese state that it will not pay back its debt fully, and it will restructure and reschedule some of it, then this means that we're in big trouble on the financial side, on the monetary side, when it comes to how much we have in terms of purchasing power.
Yeah, and I want to note one thing really quickly on a sort of side related note. We're going over this fiscal cliff again this year. We don't have a budget for 2020, and in the Constitution, as listeners will recall from last year, that there's this special mechanism that allows for the state to go through January without a budget. But then after that, it's just totally unconstitutional to have anything. You have to have a budget by the end of January. You just have to. Even though really they don't. Like last year they didn't make it, and so like they ended up doing a couple of things. One was sort of like this memorandum that was signed by, I think, the president, the prime minister, and the finance minister. So you've got like three top people from Christian, Sunni, Shia, all saying, okay, we're going to keep, basically using this mechanism beyond January. And then Parliament came back and they sort of ratified that and said, no, we're going to keep using it despite the Constitution says you can't. We're going to keep using it anyway. So what's happening this week is Monday and Tuesday are scheduled to be budget sessions, full Parliament, talk about the budget. We don't know if those will actually happen or not, but if they do, theoretically, maybe Parliament can pass a budget before the end of January. Then there's also a question, does it need to go back to the cabinet? Maybe it does need to go back to the cabinet and get endorsed there as well, because it's a new cabinet, all of that stuff. So theoretically, they may still slide in under the line, but in reality, it seems much more likely that we're going to have some sort of extra constitutional, not totally legal thing put in place, just like last year, and I believe the year before and before that, where the state keeps on using this mechanism, this extraordinary mechanism, out of context and against the law. We'll keep an eye on that. But yeah, I don't know. Will the protesters even allow Parliament to meet on Monday and Tuesday?
Yeah, there's a big question on whether protesters will let the Parliament meet to give the government, the new government, the confidence vote, or to pass the budget, because the last Parliament attempt to have a Parliament session failed because people basically blocked the various entrances, and some scuffles happened with many convoys, etc. But I think this week has proven that the momentum in the streets is getting much lower, and we can maybe say that this is the end of the first uprising, if you want, in the October 17 revolution, more or less. Basically, we saw a huge, enormous, nationwide, popular grassroots uprising, and now we're seeing much fewer actions happening, but also we're seeing more centralized things happening, and very, very small numbers compared to the ones before. So
wait, so are you saying, last Saturday, we weren't able to cover this because we'd already recorded this, but last Saturday evening, there was a really huge fight between security forces and protesters in downtown. Lots of people were injured, arrested, etc., and everything. Are you saying that the state won? That they beat the protesters?
No, I don't think so. I think the violence against protesters doesn't help the state or harms the movement so much. I don't think that this is...
But if the state comes out really hard and beats protesters down, and now you're saying this is the end...
But this is the end not because of that. This is the end because people are extremely anxious about the economic situation, and they want a government to try to do something, because they don't believe that the political class will bring in a new government. This is what most people are telling us everywhere in Lebanon, in most areas in Lebanon at least. This is the overwhelming kind of sense of, kind of giving in, just letting them try to do anything about the situation just in case. Maybe they can convince or force the banks to change the rules, the very humiliating rules.
So they're giving the Diab government a chance, you think?
I think so, yeah. I think at least 2/3 of the population are doing, around 2/3 maybe of the population, more or less, are doing this. And this is interesting because some people might see it with a lot of, a lot of pessimism, oh, the revolution is over, etc. The revolution in Lebanon in such a system, against such an establishment, cannot be happen at once. It's just impossible, right? It cannot. You're not overthrowing a dictator. You're not overthrowing a military regime or whatever. It's something that's much more complicated. You need to go through many stages, including probably uprisings in the streets, including elections. And we are witnessing the end of the first uprising and probably what's going to be a longer revolution. Because we were just talking about how Diab's government is basically a continuation of the same economic elites rule in Lebanon. And if that's the case, then the policies that we actually need to save the country economically will not be done, will not be enacted, including, most importantly, a debt restructuring plan. If this doesn't happen, along with many things that can bring in money to the state from mostly the banks and the very few that own a lot of money and wealth, then basically they will not be able to save us from this situation, and they will crash, and they will have probably another uprising that will be slightly more violent. At least my prediction will be that it will be more violent, more aggressive, and also more difficult to recover from than this one. So I believe that we have entered into this period of time, maybe 3, 4, 5 months, that is between the two uprisings of the revolution.
Well, it seems as though also, if you look just from a political angle, if you are one of the parties that stayed out of government, so you're with the Future Movement or the PSP technically, or with the Lebanese forces especially, then if just from a political calculation, thing, like you have to appear to be giving, the next government like a chance, right? But that could last like as short as like a couple weeks, right?
Yeah.
It could be very, very short on the political side until we see sort of like the politically backed protesters really out in force.
What seems,
or maybe they won't even leave.
What seems to be the case is that political parties that have been kind of left out, or it seems they are left out of the cabinet, are not so aggressive against the cabinet, right? No one has a very escalatory tone. Jumblat was like, it's better than not having a government at all. Hariri, he made a few statements, but it's not clear that he's against it. He's not mobilizing. We know our parties, when they're mobilizing against each other, they get really nasty doing that, and they will use all sort of tools and propaganda. They're not doing it. So there is a reason why Jumblat and Hariri are they're not so provoked by this government. There's something that they got in return for this kind of tolerance towards it. Because otherwise we know, and we've seen them in 2008, since 2008, how far they will go when they have a political battle to wage against the March 8, political parties. And also, there was a lot of talk about early elections, right? And the demands of a lot of people. The second demand was, like always, a government that oversees early elections, early parliamentary elections. I don't think it's going to happen. When Hassan Diab was asked about it, he said, we will have to revise the law or draft a new law and then send it to Parliament. And when Parliament approves it, it comes back to us and we approve it, then we can have the elections. This was his response when he was asked specifically if we will have an early parliamentary election, which means that this is kind of also, I mean, neither Hariri nor Jumblat, I mean, maybe the LF are the only political group that would actually win anything more than they have if an election happens today from the establishment parties. And maybe Kata'ib would win 1 or 2 seats, but like more or less all the political establishment is in this place where they don't want people to vote for or against them at this point. They don't want to know how people are thinking about them, because they know that their approval rates in general are at probably a historic low.
So you're stuck with us, and this new cabinet that we just cooked up really has a little something for everybody, probably, and it was devised under the same formulas as before. So that's it. Welcome to the new government.
Yeah. New government, same old problems.
That seems to be like the running theme so far of 2020. It's just like, we've seen this movie before. Yeah. It doesn't end well.
But one good thing is that Hassan Diab said, who knows how this government will last? 1 month, 6 months, a year, whatever. But when he said that, I was like, oh yeah, exactly. 1 month sounds great. No, like really, it's we have a lot to see this year, what's gonna happen, but nobody's expecting good stuff. So it's just about how long things last in this situation before things explode more and more. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, on that note, I think that's all the time we have. We'll be back next week with another fascinating, riveting, and ever optimistic episode of the Lebanese Politics Podcast. Until then, I'm Benjamin Red.
I'm Nizar Hassan.
And this has been the Lebanese Politics Podcast.
The Lebanese Politics Podcast is brought to you by myself, Nizar Hassan, Benjamin Red, produced behind the scenes by Susan Wilson, and the music is by Omar El Fil.